People that don't finish the steps don't stay sober. I've seen this happen with people I sponsor. I've seen this happen with people I don't sponsor. I've seen this happen with people in the rooms of AA or any 12-step fellowship for that matter. I see this happen with our clients at Camelback Recovery. The people that don't do the work don't stay sober. So focus on finishing the steps. You started it, finish it. And so the way you do it is you get a sponsor, someone that has what you want, and ask them to take you through the steps. Hello, my friend, and welcome to another episode of I Love Being Sober, sponsored by Camelback Recovery, Arizona's preferred sober living option to help AA newcomers stay sober during their first year in the program. If that's you or someone you know, then you're in the right place, because my name is Tim Westbrook, and I'm the CEO and founder of Camelback Recovery here in the always sunny and always sober Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have helped thousands of people to stop their suffering and continue on their path to recovery. Let's get clear on one thing. We believe that a relapse or a slip is not a part of recovery. And that's exactly why this podcast is dedicated to you or any loved one you know in their first year of striving to live a clean and sober life. The purpose of this podcast is to come clean with all of the misinformation that's out there about recovery, addiction treatment, mental illness, and the strategies to stay sober in general. So if you believe you're in the right place, or if you know someone who is struggling with addiction, it's my privilege to share this podcast with you. Now, I have no idea if you and I have ever met, but what I do know is that AA saved my life. And I also know that to find long-term recovery and live happy, joyous, and free, it's not just about stopping your drinking, drugging, gambling, sexual indiscretions, or any other addiction you may have struggled with or suffered from. Because at Camelback Recovery, we believe that sobriety can and should be fun. And look, any recovery process is not easy. It is challenging, it can sometimes be annoying, and for the most of us, it is often difficult to stay on the path. But here's the good news. The self-awareness you gain from listening to this podcast, especially if you are in your first year of recovery, will help you make better choices, which will ultimately lead you to living a kick-ass sober life. Visit CamelbackRecovery.com to learn more about our treatment strategies for alcoholism, drug addiction, or mental illness. And we even offer recovery coaching so that you can enjoy the freedom and happiness you've always searched for. Welcome to the 80th episode of I Love Being Sober, the show devoted to people in their first year of sobriety. If you are pressed for time, listen at 1.5 times speed, and you will still get all of the content from this episode. No need to take notes because I've paid a professional note taker to do that for you. The notes to this and other episodes are available when you look for them at ilovebeingsober.com. Please do that when you're done listening to this episode. You'll be glad you did, and that's my personal pledge to you for listening in its entirety. Now, although your first year in sobriety is central to our discussions, you and I will also explore other fascinating and important topics such as health and fitness, self-care, food and nutrition, breathwork, and biohacking, just to name a few. All of these things are your gateway to living a kick-ass sober life, which is our mantra at Camelback Recovery. In this episode number 80, you'll learn about the third mistake that leads to a relapse along with how to avoid it. This is mistake number 3. You'll discover that not finishing the steps is one of the mistakes people make that leads to a slip, along with why it is so important to avoid this mistake if you want to avoid it. I will share how you can avoid this mistake. I'm going to share my story along with a couple of other stories of other people and how they either finished the steps and didn't finish the steps and how that ended. Based upon what you hear in this episode, you'll be able to figure out how it works for you. So lean in and listen carefully, because this episode could have a significant impact on how you can make it to a year and much closer to living a kick-ass sober life. Also, this podcast is like an AA meeting in that everyone here is either clean and sober, struggling to get clean and sober, maybe on the verge of a relapse, thinking about getting clean and sober, or maybe a loved one of someone that should get clean and sober, or whatever it may be. So if you learn anything, or if you hear anything that resonates with you throughout this episode, please let us know in the comments section of YouTube or Apple or iTunes or wherever you're listening. What you share might resonate with someone else and possibly save them from a relapse or maybe even save their life. Every review and every comment gets us that much closer to helping one more person or one more family. So don't be shy and be sure to share what resonates with you in the comment section. The third mistake you must be aware of if you want to avoid a slip is not finishing the steps. Completing the steps is part of the foundation to your recovery, and not finishing the steps means that the foundation to which your recovery is built is not complete. Finishing your steps is one of the main ways you will build a solid foundation. And it means you're following through with what you started. You start and you finish. You just finish the steps. You say you're going to do it, follow through and do it. And before you got clean and sober, likely you started many things that you didn't finish. And maybe you were not reliable. You were not responsible. You didn't do what you said you were going to do. Again, lying, cheating, and stealing. And this is a different way of living life. So regardless of what happens, even if your life starts to get better, even if you start to feel better, you must follow through and finish the steps all the way through to the end. And listen, if maybe you're not part of the 12-step program, maybe you're involved in some other recovery program. If you're part of some other recovery program, just make sure that you finish whatever it is that you start. Making a commitment and following through. Clearing away the wreckage of your past, digging deep to learn more about yourself, more about why you did what you did, looking at your part of all of the resentments you have and making amends accordingly, and then figuring out your values. What are your values? And live according to your values moving forward. This is how you wipe the slate clean and start living a new life. You cannot start living a new life until this process has been completed. This is part of the recovery process. The first 3 steps are easy. The real work begins at step 4. The freedom from the guilt and the shame starts at step 5. There's more relief at step 9 once you start completing your 9th step amends. Again, it's a process. You can't just skip to step 9. I've seen people try to do that. And lots of people, they get clean and sober and they just want to go straight to step 9. They want to start making their amends and you're not ready yet. You've got to do the steps in order. Step 10, this is how you continuously clean up your wreckage as it happens in real time. This is how you keep the slate clean. You keep the guilt and shame from resurfacing. Step 11 is when you ask your higher power for direction and guidance. This is, God, show me what to do, or whatever your higher power is. Tell me what to do. This is learning to pray for God's will, not my will. And my prayers before getting clean and sober, before finishing the steps, before getting involved with the 12-step program, I used to pray for things that were self-serving. God, please help me not get in trouble. God, please help me get out of this. If I get out of this, I won't ever do it again. God, help me please not to get caught. God, help me get this job, get this girl, get laid tonight, whatever it may be. And I know most people, this is what they pray for. God, please help me to make it through. God, please help me to be successful. God, please help me to win this race. Those are the things that are self-serving. When I pray for the things that I want, I'm setting myself up to be resentful at God. When I pray for God's will, then obviously I'm praying, whatever happens, it's up to God. God's in control. My higher power is in control. The universe is in control. Somebody besides Tim is in control. And I'll tell you what, living that way has been so much easier because I'm not in control. And I don't need to pray for things to happen the way that I want them to happen. It's just things happen the way that they're supposed to. Everything always works out exactly the way that it's supposed to, according to God's plan. And when I'm praying for God's will and God's plan, even if I don't agree with things that are happening and how they're happening, At the end of the day, looking back, hindsight being 2020, I always say, wow, okay, I didn't think that was going to happen that way. And it always works out better than I planned it. I can tell you that much. Step 12 is carrying the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, being of service, which step 12, carrying the message, keeps me involved, keeps me engaged. It keeps me accountable to working the 12 steps and being involved with the 12-step program. Now, most people do the first 3 steps. It's easy to do the first 3 steps. And some people, they do the first 3 steps. They don't really want to do the work because step 4, that's when the real work begins. But you can do the first 3 steps. Life gets a little better. And next thing you know, the focus shifts. The focus shifts. You find a girl, you find a guy, you're looking for sex, you're looking for money, you get your job back or you find a new job. Things at work start to get a little better. Sports gets a little better. You start exercising, you're feeling a little bit better. And so the focus shifts away from the steps onto these other things. Now, what happens when the relationship doesn't work out? What happens when you get fired? What happens when things at work aren't going as planned? Then you're back to looking at yourself, and that's when relapse happens. I've seen it time and time and time again. So my experience with working the steps is that I finished the steps. I got clean and sober. I got a sponsor. I started going to meetings. I did step work every single week. I met with my sponsor on a weekly basis. I called my sponsor daily and I diligently did step work. I didn't fly through the steps. It took me several months to get all the way through the steps, but I was doing step work on a regular basis. I was journaling. I was taking instructions or directions from my sponsor. I was doing what he told me to do. That was my focus. I didn't date. I didn't try to go out and get a new relationship. I wasn't seeking a new relationship. I focused on myself because I was focused on transformation. I wanted to be a different person. I wanted to learn how to live life differently. And I knew that I needed to finish the steps. I remember, I was at a point, I wanted to start dating. And I think I was probably, 6 to 8 months into the deal, but I was not done with the steps yet. And I remember my sponsor said, don't start dating yet. He said, wait until you're finished with the steps because your focus will change. If you start seeking out a relationship, your focus is going to shift and you won't finish the steps. And I'm so grateful that I took his suggestion and I finished the steps. And mind you, I'm still clean and sober today. And I'm one of the few people that didn't relapse. There's more than 90% of people relapse within their first year. I didn't relapse. And I would attribute finishing the steps was a big part of why I didn't relapse. I've got another story about a guy named John. John was a guy that I sponsored, and I talked about John in episode number 78. He didn't finish the steps. Now, he was working the steps. He was doing great. He did step 1, 2, 3. He did 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He did step 9. He did step 10. And then, it was so crazy. Looking back, hindsight being 2020, right? Looking back at John, I remember there was excuses. And I can't meet this week because I've got to do this. I can't meet this week because I've got to do this. And then next thing you know, he started getting away from the program, not finishing what he started, not following through with what he said he was going to do. When you're not able to fulfill a commitment that you make to yourself, it's hurtful. It hurts you. And he started dating. Next thing you know, he has a girlfriend. He was so close to finishing the steps, but he starts dating. He gets a girlfriend. Again, like I said earlier, his focus shifts. And of course, he ended up relapsing. And if you want to hear the whole story, listen to episode number 78. And now we're doing the steps again and we're meeting weekly. And I hope that he follows through and finishes the steps all the way to step 12, because that's the only way he has a chance. I have another sponsee of mine. His name's David. I met David at 𝐃𝐨𝐧'𝐭, which is the homeless shelter. I used to bring a meeting to the shelter a couple of times a week. And I met David at the shelter. And I'll tell you what, David was diligent. David worked the steps. I met with David on a weekly basis. He completed the steps. He did the steps all the way through to the end. And here we are today. It's about 2 years later, and he's still clean and sober. The reality, my experience, people that don't finish the steps don't stay sober. I've seen this happen with people I sponsor. I've seen this happen with people I don't sponsor. I've seen this happen with people in the rooms of AA or any 12-step fellowship for that matter. I see this happen with our clients at Camelback Recovery. The people that don't do the work don't stay sober. So focus on finishing the steps. You started it, finish it. And so the way you do it is you get a sponsor, someone that has what you want, and ask them to take you through the steps. Now, it's up to you. Your sponsor is not going to force you through the steps. You have to say, hey, let's get this thing going. And I have my uncle got into the program recently. I remember, and I was meeting with him. We had a men's group that we went to every Thursday, and he came for a while. And I remember his sponsor was not as available. And so I think he probably did the first 3 steps. And then he said, oh, well, and every week it would be Jim, whatever his name was. Jim wasn't available. I haven't met with Jim. I'm still stuck on step 3. I might need to get a new sponsor. I'm not really sure. And so the suggestion that I gave my uncle was, listen, you need to get a new sponsor. If your sponsor's not available, you need to go get a new sponsor. And so it's up to you to make sure that you finish the steps. Your sponsor is there to guide you through the steps, but he's not going to be super aggressive about it. Remember, the reason he's sponsoring you is so that he stays sober. So when picking out your sponsor, it doesn't need to be the perfect sponsor. You just need a sponsor, somebody that's willing to be your sponsor, somebody that has what you want. And I remember my very first sponsor, his name was Ray. And I met him at Prince of Peace. Prince of Peace was the second meeting I went to. And Ray said, hey, I'll sponsor you if you want. And I said, great. And I remember I was working with Ray. We did the first 3 steps. I met with him on a weekly basis. I called him every single day. He was super helpful in getting me on the path. And I remember he was an attorney, but I remember I didn't have a lot in common with Ray. And I remember thinking, man, I don't know if he's the right sponsor for me. And then things happened. And there was another guy that I bumped into, and he actually ended up, so I owned a home in Arcadia, and it was a really nice home. And I remember I was looking for a new tenant for this home. It was a vacation rental. And I received an application from someone, and actually his wife and the realtor came and toured my home. And then in looking at the application, I realized that he was on the board of directors of Crossroads. And Crossroads is a nonprofit treatment center. And anybody that's on the board of directors of Crossroads is also in the 12-step program. And this guy, his name was Todd, and he had what I wanted. He was successful in business, successful in life. He had, I think, probably 15 years of sobriety at that time. And he was more in line with the lifestyle that I wanted to live. And I asked him to be my sponsor. He ended up being my sponsor for the first 7 years of my sobriety. So I'm grateful to Ray. And he wasn't the perfect sponsor, but guess he was the perfect sponsor at the beginning for my first 3 steps. And then when I realized he wasn't the perfect sponsor, I moved to another sponsor. So it's okay. And it's easy to switch sponsors. And today I have another sponsor because it was time for me to change sponsors again, was my feeling anyways. So focus on working your steps. Once you find a sponsor, you focus on working the steps. You work them honestly and thoroughly, and take direction and guidance from your sponsor. Take suggestions. Remember, your best thinking got you where you are today. So listening to somebody else, doing the steps as prescribed or as instructed is going to be the best thing that you can do for yourself. You are focused on transforming your life. It takes a lot of work and a lot of focus to get this done. So here's a quick review about the insights you and I both rediscovered in this 80th episode of I Love Being Sober. The third mistake people make that leads to a relapse is not finishing the steps, along with why avoiding this mistake is imperative if you want to avoid a relapse. I also shared with you my experience with finishing the steps, along with a few other stories of other people that both finished the steps and people that did not finish the steps. Based upon the stories I shared in this episode, you can figure out how you can avoid this mistake and you can figure out how it works for you. And remember, these insights will only work for you if you work them. So please make sure you apply what you've learned in this episode of I Love Being Sober, because if you do, you will be on your way to living a kick-ass sober life. And I think you'll agree that's exciting to think about. And speaking of reviews, before we end this episode, I want you to go to the reviews section on iTunes or leave a comment in YouTube and type in one thing that resonated with you that you heard in this episode. Every comment counts, and what you share could resonate with someone else that is struggling and potentially save their life. You will also be asked to rate this episode. I hope that I've earned 5 stars from you. So go ahead and share the one thing that resonated with you in the reviews section of iTunes or wherever you're listening. It'll take just 3 minutes out of your day, but what you share could not only save you, but it could also save someone's life. Okay, that does it for the week. My name's Tim Westbrook, and I hope that our paths cross again next week for I Love Being Sober, the show devoted to people in their first year of sobriety. Sound good? And do whatever it takes to join me for episode number 81, because we're going to dig into mistake number 4, getting into a relationship. I will share my experience with this mistake along with how to avoid it. I encourage you to invite a friend, a loved one, or a sponsee to listen to I Love Being Sober. I can't wait to connect with you then. It will be an insightful episode, so I really want you to join us with your loved one.